Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you Sarah Hurwitz. From 2009 to 2017, Sarah served as a White House speechwriter, first as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then as head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Prior to the Obama administration, Sarah was chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. Sarah is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and she is the author of Here All Along. Strongly recommend you get it. Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism. Sarah, welcome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you for having me. This is an amazing, amazing day.
Well, we're so excited to have you here. I wonder if you could just start by talking about just your professional journey, right? How did you come to be Michelle Obama's head speechwriter, and what was it like to work for her?
Yeah, I came to be her head speechwriter through just a lot of failure, actually. I interned in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office in the summer of 1998 in college, and the writers I interned for got me my first two jobs out of college, both of which were disasters. The second one was for a U.S. senator, and after 9 months, his chief of staff sat me down and said, "I hear you've applied to law school. You should definitely go. That would be a good fit for you." Because I was 23, I didn't know how to write speeches. I don't know why they hired me. Went to law school. My third week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. Back then, he was a law school classmate of mine, and he'd previously been a speechwriter for President Clinton. And the two of us just started freelancing together. And he really taught me how you write to be heard rather than read, and how you structure a speech. So we both got jobs on General Wes Clark's primary campaign for president in 2003, and Clark lost. We got jobs on John Kerry's campaign for president in 2004, and Kerry lost. I got a job as Hillary's chief speechwriter in 2008. She too lost. So, couple failed jobs, several losing campaigns, not looking great. But then I got hired on the Obama campaign in 2008 to write for then Senator Obama, and he actually won, which was like a huge thing for me, never experienced before, much better than losing. And I went to the White House to write for him. But on that campaign, I worked with Mrs. Obama on her 2008 Democratic Convention speech, and I got to be kind of close to her. And when I went to the White House while I was writing full-time for him, I'd help her out on the side. And after about a couple of years, I realized I just liked writing for her better. And so in a very surprising White House career move, probably especially surprising to President Obama, I moved over from writing for him to being her chief speechwriter. And that is how I got there. Long and winding road.
Tell us, what would you say are your best tips for writing, and how you come to write a good speech?
Yeah, so I think, the first one is say something true. I think so often when people are thinking of writing a speech or an email or a memo or whatever, they're saying, okay, what will make me look smart or powerful or funny, or what does my audience want to hear? Those are great questions, but they're not your first question. Your first question should really be, what is the deepest, most helpful, and most important truth I can tell at this particular moment? Just get very clear with that. What is really true here? Now, you may not be able to tell that truth or that whole truth. You may have to kind of massage a little bit. That's okay. But get really still and what is true here? And then figure out how do you convey it to your audience. I think about President Barack Obama's Democratic Convention speech in 2004, back when he was running for Senate. He started that speech by saying, let's face it, my presence on this stage tonight is pretty unlikely. And he then went on to speak about how his grandfather was a goat herder in Kenya. It's okay, there aren't many political consultants in 2004 who would be like, hey dude, you should really point out to everyone that you're a Black guy named Barack Hussein Obama, and it's unusual for you to be on stage, and your family has roots in Kenya, right? That wasn't, typically a consultant would be like, talk about your Midwestern grandparents and this and that, but he just got up and he said, yeah, this is what's true. And I think it was a little bracing, and people look at him and it gave him credibility to say something true. My second tip that's very important is just talk like a human being. Even better, talk like yourself. Just an idea. I think so often you see people in the business world who get up and they're such dynamic and funny and interesting people. They get behind a podium and just lose their minds. We need to leverage our platform to catalyze transformative, results-oriented change. what are you talking about? Or you hear politicians saying, we need to put hardworking American middle-class family values first. You have never turned to your spouse and said, honey, I think we should really leverage our platform to catalyze some movie tickets. You have never turned to your neighbor and been like, hey, Bob, we should really put hardworking American middle-class family values first, shouldn't we? If you wouldn't say something to one person, don't say it to many people. It just doesn't get better. So speak in your own voice. When you are preparing to speak and you're practicing it and it feels unnatural and like you are giving a speech, it's bad. Stop and just rewrite it in your own voice. My final tip, which is probably one of the most important, is show, don't tell, which everyone thinks they know. It's like, writing 101. Very few people do it. And oftentimes if you're bored during a speech, it's because the person is telling and not showing. So what do I mean by this? I'm going to tell you two versions of the story of my friend John. My friend John, version 1, he's very exacting, very uptight, very neurotic, very compulsive, very precise. Okay. Version 2, I left my friend John alone in my kitchen for 10 minutes. And when I returned, he'd alphabetized my spice rack and he was centering the magnets on my refrigerator with a ruler. If I call you tomorrow, will you remember the list of 5 adjectives from version 1? Or will you remember the images from version 2? A real life example of this is actually how Michelle Obama started her 2016 Democratic Convention speech. She did not start that speech by telling you, when we first came to the White House, I was anxious, I was nervous, I was scared, I was worried, I was uneasy. She started that speech by telling you, on my daughter's first day of school, I watched them climb into those big black cars with those large men with guns, and I saw their little faces pressed up against the window, and I asked myself, what have we done? Okay, you know how she's feeling. She showed you, there's an image. If I call you tomorrow, you will not remember the adjectives, you will remember that image. So showing and not telling, very important.
So you were in the White House,
Mm-hmm.
and as you told us in today's opening session, right, you started thinking a lot about Judaism.
Yeah.
And then you wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Tell us, like, what were the biggest challenges in writing this book, and sort of why, like, what was that process like for you?
Yeah. It was so hard. Writing this book made being a White House speechwriter look like a joke. Like, that was so much easier than writing this book. And I think people who are kind of Jewish insiders who really know Judaism, live and breathe Judaism, have a lot of Jewish education, don't realize how tremendously difficult it is to translate Judaism for people who don't have that context. Let's just take the phrase, the rabbi said. Our rabbis said X. Our sages said Y. Okay, great. Who are the rabbis? Oh, okay. In the year 70, when the Romans destroyed the temple, I'm sorry, the temple? What's the temple? Oh, sorry. Jews used to worship God by making sacrifices at a large temple in Jerusalem. What? Like, why did they do that? Oh, sorry. Okay. So the Torah actually, it indicates that it's important that Jews need to worship, sacrifice animals at this temple to worship God. Okay. I know the Torah is the thing on the scrolls. It's at the front of the synagogue. It's in Hebrew. What is it? I mean, if you ask the average American Jew, what is the Torah? You're going to be a little surprised by the answer. It's probably not going to be as informed as you think. If you would ask me that 6 years ago, I don't know if I would have been able to articulate it has something to do with the Bible. I wouldn't have known its plot, its key animating ideas. So just to give people enough information to understand the phrase the rabbi said took me 2 chapters. And that, so just like the structure of it, making it a book that was both moving to really sophisticated people, like sort of in on the joke, and that would also, people without a lot of knowledge could read it, was challenging. A friend pointed out that it's sort of like Sesame Street in a way, where if you watch Sesame Street as an adult, it's very funny, right? It's edgy and ironic, and they're kind of making fun of popular culture. I mean, it's quite clever. And if you watch it as a kid, it's just sort of delightful. And so I think, what's been, I think the most satisfying to me is that, yeah, I've had disengaged Jews like me say, oh, I love your book, it really spoke to me. I've also had a lot of very, very observant Jews and very, very learned Jews say to me, like, your book was really for me. Like, this book was for me. Like, this was a very different take on Judaism, or this was like, I hadn't thought of like this fresh idea. And that's because I came to this with a beginner's mind. right? I came to it without like a day school education, without all the background. And I did a lot of learning, but just from a very kind of new and beginner's perspective. And so I think a lot of the most enthusiastic feedback I've gotten from my books has been from like rabbinical school professors, or like very, you know, my friends who consider themselves ultra Orthodox have really liked it. And that's almost been a little surprising, but it's been really gratifying and moving.
Apparently my space bar is not unmuting me. There we go. Let's, if we can, sort of transition a little bit. I know, you know, one of the things that people are really looking for right now in a moment like this is connection to the divine, and that's also, I think, really one of the things that Jews struggle with the most. I mean, surveys consistently of Jews in America show that you know, besides atheists or self-declared atheists, we're the most likely to be agnostic or even atheist ourselves. And really struggle with the nature of God and the nature of divinity. I'm wondering, what is God to you, and what does that mean, and what thoughts might you offer for people who struggle with God?
Yeah, you know, what is so surprising to me about Judaism is that our reaction to God in many Jewish spaces is just an awkward silence, right? It's like we say names for God in our prayers, we show up, we do the thing, but like, how often do you speak with other Jews about what God means to you, about when and where you feel or don't feel God, about your conceptions of God? This is not something we talk about. So I don't think we should be super shocked when a lot of younger Jews find their way to other traditions, because they have spiritual yearnings and leanings and questions. And if our response to those questions is kind of an awkward silence, they really should go elsewhere. And it doesn't need to be a silence, because we have a tremendous amount of wisdom and an insight around the divine in Judaism. And I think for me, knowing almost nothing about Judaism for most of my life, I really did think that my one Jewish option for believing in God was separate being who controls everything. And if that's true, I'm out. I'm out. If there is a God who is all powerful and controls everything, I am absolutely out. I cannot tolerate the mental gymnastics necessary to make that work. And I hope this isn't coming off as harsh or offensive, but I just, once you get down that road of, okay, if God controls everything, what about the Holocaust? Well, God didn't perpetrate the Holocaust, people did. Okay, then what was this all-powerful God doing all day? Well, it's sort of complicated. I mean, it's like, you know, I've had friends say, you know, well, sometimes you ask God for things and God says no. If there's a God who's going to say no to an abused foster child, I'm out. So that to me was a huge wall and a huge barrier to any kind of spirituality. But actually, fortunately, Judaism is a lot more complicated than that. I think our theology, much more diverse, much more interesting and moving. I mean, I talked a little bit about this in the opening session, but there are just so many different conceptions of the divine. And we actually do really have this humility of not rigidly and dogmatically defining God. I think those Jews who insist on doing so maybe aren't totally honoring the complexity and richness of our tradition. So I would suggest maybe it's important to actually see what our tradition offers. And it offers many, many different conceptions and understandings, a lot of which are really contradictory. And that's true of my own personal theology to the extent I have one. You know, I believe that God is the animating source of all life. I believe that everything is God. I believe all of you are God. I believe that the man who I passed on the street who asked me if I could spare $1, that man is God. That is, I believe that God is also, it's a force of boundless love. I believe that God is what does make for me becoming my highest and truest self. So I think of God as everything, as a source of life, as a force, but I relate to God as a you. I relate to God as a you because my little human heart and brain, I can't have relationship with a force. I can't have relationship with the animating source of all life. Just can't do it. If you asked a tree how it refers to the God, maybe it would be to God, maybe it would be a different language, but I'm a human and I relate to other beings in a relational way. So while I don't believe that God is a being in the sky who controls things, I don't believe that there's a God who can intervene in my life. I very much relate to God as a you. And I think in moments where I felt most connected to the divine, I feel it as a force of just overwhelmingly being known and loved and held. That's how I feel the divine. And so I think that the theology, understanding that Jewish theology was so diverse, really opened me up to understanding like, oh, I don't have to just either accept or reject a man in the sky who controls things. Actually, there's more. And then for me, I also think experience has become very important. You know, I've now attended probably 14 or 15 week-long silent Jewish meditation retreats, and these are a really important part of my spiritual practice. There are weeks when my mind gets very quiet, when, you know, I spend time in meditation and prayer, and I feel like I get in touch with things that are harder to get in touch with on a daily basis. I also think, you know, I love what Rabbi Art Green writes about how he has this beautiful paragraph in one of his books where he says, you know, think about the moment when your child was born, or when you watched your parent take their last breath, or when you were just swept away by a piece of art or music, or you were out looking at the night sky or looking from the top of a mountain on a view and your breath was just taken away and there were no words, right? It was just a feeling of awe and wonder. You know, I think we've all had transcendent moments in our lives. And I think the man in the sky theology makes it hard for us to understand those transcendent moments as somehow connected with the divine. So I'm really big on a very wide open approach to the divine. And I think that it can just, that when I personally have just gotten in touch with this, it's really filled my life with a greater sense of awe and wonder and gratitude and openness. And it's really helped me connect more deeply to what I think of as, you know, my divine spark within, what is sort of my truest self. So, you know, that's what's been helpful to me, but it's so personal, right? I can't prescribe anything to all of you or judge you or say what you should do. It's a journey you kind of have to take yourself.
That's such an honest reflection. Do you pray to that God?
Great question. I love that question. You know, I don't really pray a lot. It's just the honest answer. I don't have a regular prayer practice. You know, I certainly go to services on the holy days. I certainly, you know, I show up back when we could do so. I would once in a while show up on a Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat service. But it's funny, I don't pray a lot in a traditional way, but I do find myself asking, like, what do you want of me in this? And I'm not asking a man in the sky, what, you know, it's more like, I think I love Viktor Frankl and his writing about how the question isn't, what do I want from life? It's what does life want from me? And I kind of think that's almost how I address the divine. It's not like, what do I want from you, God? Because I don't believe there's a God who can intervene or grant me things. But I do believe that there is a divine that calls me to do things. So I'm often kind of asking, like, okay, what do you want from me in this? How can I serve you in this? How can I be in alignment with you in this? And again, I'm not asking a being this. I am asking something bigger, something larger, something intimate and also infinite, you know? And I will say, when you try to talk about the divine, unless you are an atheist or another kind of fundamentalist, you sound like an idiot. I feel like an idiot. I think I sound contradictory. You could probably poke holes in anything that I have just said. It would not stand up in a court of law, and I'm not going to try to defend it in that way. It's a different sphere of operation. But I will say, a rabbi once said to me, he said, you know, Sarah, the question isn't whether or not you can use your law degree to defend this in a court of law. The question is, when you run this on your operating system, does it make you a better person? Does it make you kinder and wiser and more honest and more brave and more loving? And the answer is yes. And that's good enough for me.
So you just talked about being kinder and more loving. It seems a natural segue then to talk about ethics for a second, right? How does ethics play into your Jewish approach, right? And what does it mean to bring ethics and elevate them as part of how you see yourself as a Jew and how we can operate as a community?
Yeah, you know, it's really important for me to try to convey to disengaged Jews like me that, you know, when you say that like Jewish ethics or values are like tikkun olam, social justice, help those who are struggling, that's a real diminishment of what Judaism actually offers. You know, those are universal values. Every decent person in tradition believes those things. What I think Judaism offers that is so spectacular is a deep, deep dive into precisely what it means to live out those values on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. You know, you can say, oh, speak kindly, don't gossip. What does that mean? What is gossip? What does it mean to be kind? How do you avoid humiliating or shaming people? You know, there's such complexity in so many different scenarios that you could encounter. And what I appreciate so much about Judaism is that it goes deep into those scenarios. And once you start studying Jewish ethics, what I've found is that personally, it kind of shapes how I act every day. You know, especially the Jewish thinking around speech, around shaming people, around sharing gossip. You know, I find myself catching myself a lot now where, you know, if I'm in an argument with someone and I want to just like stick it to them, I want to make them look bad because I want to win. And I can just see like, I'm about to humiliate this person. I'm about to do it because it feels really good. And like that, there's just that little reminder of like, that's something that my tradition really warns me against. Shaming people is very hurtful, and that resonance can last in them a long time. And I'll just pause. And look, do I often still do it? Yes, I'm not that amazing a person, but I do pause. You know, if I'm typing an email and I'm about to kind of just say something about someone else, kind of pass on a piece of gossip, I'm like, do I want to do this? Like, is that a good idea? This is not just be nice to others, social justice. This is a very nitty-gritty approach to how you operate in the world. And I think we really need more of that right now. You know, I think in addition, you know, the ethic of modern American law is very much like, you know, do whatever you want, just don't assault other people, steal their property, or infringe on their civil rights. It's a really low bar, right? Doesn't say anything about generosity, compassion, wisdom, maturity, loving kindness. It's a real problem. And I will also say, you know, just looking at the ethic of chesed, of loving kindness, you know, that sets a really high bar for our expectations of how we treat others. You know, the fact that you are really required by Jewish law to physically show up for people who are sick, for people who are in mourning. You don't just send a text. You don't just send flowers. You get your body to them and you are physically there. You show them a ministry of presence. Now, we can't do that right now, most of us, right? It is not safe for most of us to do that right now, and we shouldn't. We value saving a life over just about anything. So, but I still think that we can honor that principle of like showing a really deep and powerful presence for each other, whether it's on the phone, via Zoom. You know, that's something that Judaism calls me to do. And I think a lot about that, about how I am really deeply and lovingly present for people. So I think I think all of this feels really particularly relevant right now in a time where so many of us are struggling and trying to figure out how to do the right thing and how to be there for each other.
Now, you have talked about yourself multiple times, even just during the last 24 minutes or so, referring to yourself as a disaffected or disconnected Jew.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's so honest. It's also really, it's remarkable sitting here listening to a.
I want to clarify, that was me in the past, not me now, but go ahead.
Okay. But aren't we all like I think most Jews at one point or another in their lives feel like they have the capacity to apply that label to themselves. And so
Sure.
what I actually wonder, if I can ask you this, right? Like you're a communications person, right? So is the problem with the Jewish, like, were you, and do you think many people are disaffected or disconnected because there's a problem with the content? Or is it actually a communications issue about the way that we talk about what Jewish is and why someone might be inspired or impacted or find relevance within the tradition?
Great question. So I think the problem is not the content of Judaism, right? I think Judaism has much wonderful, wonderful content that it would be so powerful and relevant in people's lives. The problem is that no one knows about this content. And I know it's so hard for people in spaces like this to hear this. I often get that, no, that's not true. Jews are very engaged. People know things. It's like, they don't. The vast majority of American Jews know very little about Judaism. And I think that when you are someone like one of those Jews like me, Judaism just seems weird and stale and obsolete. When you show up for High Holy Day services or a Seder and you don't really know what's going on, but like, that's, Bubby would want you to be there in the Holocaust, so you should just go, and like, okay, cool. And Judaism is about like, when there's an anti-Semitic incident, I'm proud to be Jewish. Like, if that's your Judaism, it's not that meaningful. Like, it's just not really something, like, why would you bother to show up for that? Like, you can find much more meaningful ways to spend your time, right? You can go to like SoulCycle or yoga or meditation or therapy or CrossFit or all these other ways that will be much more moving to you. But once you actually know something about Judaism, once you understand the powerful messages and ideas behind those holidays, once you have a sense of Jewish ethics, of Jewish spirituality, once you really can kind of like unpack that, you begin to realize that Judaism has profound wisdom for your life that is very relevant for you hour to hour and minute to minute. And so I think the main problem is just we don't have a lot of literacy around the content of Judaism. I think a subsidiary and maybe smaller, but also serious problem is that, you know, oftentimes the messaging around Judaism, especially in certain parts of the institutional world, are Judaism equals anti-Semitism plus Israel. And I find that really heartbreaking because, of course, anti-Semitism is a huge and rising problem. It always has been. It is especially now. It's serious. Of course, Israel is central to Judaism. Always has been, always will be. No question. But to take a 4,000-year tradition that also involves holidays, rituals, ethics, spirituality, music, art, food, culture, history, languages, and to shrink it down to 2 issues, how disrespectful. How disrespectful. I think that's a terrible message. I think a more powerful message would be Judaism equals powerful wisdom for how to be a good person, how to lead a beautiful and worthy and meaningful life, and how to find powerful spiritual connection and connection to a broader community. Like, that's, I think, a message that would really resonate.
That's so inspiring, Sarah.
Thanks.
I feel like we can all use a little more inspiration right now as we pretend like we're surrounded by hundreds of people and really just sit in our little cubicle rooms and stare at metal and plastic screens. But we've got a few minutes before we'll open up to questions from everyone. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about inspiration, maybe share if there's a specific speech you wrote or a specific memory you have from your time in the White House that was particularly inspiring that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, you know, I think often actually about a speech that I wrote for Mrs. Obama in 2016. It was her final college commencement speech she gave. She gave 3 or 4 of these every year, and this was her very last one as First Lady. And it was at the City College of New York. And when I found out she was speaking there, I was very moved because when my great-grandparents first came to America from Eastern Europe, my great-grandmother was so excited that they were settling in New York City because they had 4 daughters. And New York City had this city college system that accepted women, it accepted Jews, and accepted people who had very little money. And that was my family. That was these 4 daughters. So she thought, like, my girls can go to school. They can get an education in this country. But unfortunately, the family left New York. They moved out of state. And my grandmother, who was one of those 4 daughters, she never got a chance to go to college. And my grandmother, who passed away in 2011, she was this incredibly passionate person who cared deeply about politics and social justice. She was like an FDR kind of Democrat. And she always wanted to go to college. She always wanted to go to law school. She wanted to be a lawyer, and she wanted to go into politics. That was her dream. And until her dying days at age 99, she just had such regret that she never got to do that. It was just something that she just felt so keenly. And it was pretty extraordinary that just 2 generations later, I am rolling up to the City College of New York, the very school that my grandmother so yearned to attend 2 generations ago. I have a college degree. I'm a lawyer. I am working in politics for the first African-American First Lady of the United States. And I have to say, looking out at this audience of graduates, kids at this school, they come from 150 nationalities. They speak 100 languages. It's a commuter school. They commute 2 or 3 hours a day to get there. They work 2 and 3 jobs. It is this generation of striving, dreaming immigrants. And to hear Michelle Obama say to them, you know, immigrants have always made this country great. Our diversity is our greatest strength. And just to think about how just 2 generations ago, so many of the people sitting in those seats were Jews. And it was just a really moving moment and a very powerful image of what I think the real arc of American history is, what I think the real American story is, despite, you know, a little diversion we've had from it now. I think that's who we really are. Quite moving.
That's such a powerful vision of what our country is and can be. Thank you. Sarah, is it all right if we open up to questions from 160 of our closest friends?
Please, let's do it.
Wonderful. So I do see some questions that are being typed into the chat box. You're also welcome to press the raise hand button. You can find that if you open the participants window, and then you can like actually speak like human beings once did long ago. So we'll open up for questions. And all you got to do is just press the button, the raise hand button, and we'll call on you. Okay, in the meantime, there was a question from Randall, who is asking if you might give some advice, Sarah, for those of us who are parents of young adult Jewish children, and have had basic Jewish Hebrew school education, but no longer feel that Jewish ritual or practice speaks to them, right? What do you say to someone who's not really finding meaning right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's tough because I think that, with young adult children, when you, as I think all of your parents know, when you try to tell them, like, you should do this, you should be more engaged, like, that doesn't work. It sort of has the opposite effect. So I think the question is, what are your young adult children passionate about in their lives? Are they passionate about social justice, about certain, economic or social issues? There's a whole Jewish social justice world doing really amazing work around that. Are they into the outdoors, into environmentalism? There's a whole like Torah wilderness, Jewish outdoor space that's really powerful. Are they young people who love hanging out with their friends, who love to sort of create community in their apartments? I mean, obviously not possible now, but can be done via Zoom. There are organizations like One Table, which helps young people host Shabbat dinners, and they're helping these kids host them on Zoom, right? So there are a lot of ways to just like, I think it can really help to kind of tap into like, what are these young people, what are they passionate about? And can you find them, like help them find a Jewish space or Jewish community to explore it? I think that's kind of one way to think about it. Yeah, that would probably be my best advice. And I'm glad you asked me about young adult children, because people often ask me about like, how do I make my young kids Jewish? And I have no idea. No idea, don't know, I'm not an educator, not a parent, but I do know that Hebrew school is not the problem. The problem is that many of us, including me, stop learning when we're 13. 20 years later, we have kids. Suddenly we realize someone got to make this kid Jewish. Ain't going to be me because I don't know anything. I'll dump this whole project on some Hebrew school teacher and get mad at them when they don't do it. Not fair. This is not something that Hebrew school teachers or rabbis can do. So my answer to them is always just like, you have to become an adult Jew, right? You have to grow up, got to read a few books, maybe take a class, figure out what in Judaism moves you, and then you'll know how to pass it on to your kids.
I'm seeing a lot of heads bob up and down, which I think means people agree with you right now, Sarah. I'm gonna turn the floor to Sarit, who has a really interesting question for you. Great. Sarit, you're unmuted.
Thanks. Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for a lovely talk. I just wanted to ask, it sounds like you must have had a fascinating career. Well, you still have a fascinating career. And I just wonder if you ever struggled, having to write a speech involving something that you disagree with, or, that you actually maybe even found hypocritical, or, just distasteful, whatever, maybe even milder than that. And how did you manage that experience?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And, it's often phrased in the way people phrase it is they often say, what do you do when you disagree with the person you're writing for? And my answer is I don't. I just absolutely don't. I only write for people whose views I share, period. I would never be comfortable articulating views that I found harmful or problematic or abhorrent. I just constitutionally could not do that. So it's always been important for me to write for people with whom I agree. Now, stepping back, look, are there maybe tiny differences of nuances of shades of opinion? Sure, maybe, no one agrees with anyone else 100%, obviously, but it's very important to me that the core basic animating values are very much in line with anyone I write for. I have occasionally disagreed with, how someone I was writing for wanted to say something. Like with Mrs. Obama, I might think, okay, I actually think a more effective way to say it is like this. And I would tell her, and she would say, okay, I appreciate that, thank you. And she might take the advice and she might not. And that's okay, because she's the one at the podium. So at the end of the day, I just kind of would defer to her. And I will tell you that pretty much always she was right. She was so good. I would just be like, oh, she was right. My idea was terrible. I shouldn't have suggested that. So, my answer is I write for people whose values I share.
Thank you, Sarit, for that question. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I'm going to unmute Ruthie, who has a really great question for you. Ruthie?
Hi, Sarah. I'm reading your book right now and actually finding it really comforting during this time, this strange time. And I'm curious if you have experienced the pandemic differently as a Jew than you think you might have before you wrote this book.
Oh, yes. Gosh, that's such a great question. Definitely. And it's funny, like, I think that Jewish spirituality has come into play a lot for me during this pandemic. I actually just got back from not got back. I mean, I did it in my apartment through Zoom, but I attended a week-long silent meditation retreat all through Zoom, literally from my apartment. And I found that it just gave me some real space and a sense of respite, and, doing morning prayers with people all over the world. It just was really moving and helpful to me. So having that structure. I think the second thing is, like, having a Jewish community has been really meaningful to me. And it's funny for me to say that because I'm actually not a member of a synagogue. I'm almost 43. I don't have kids. I'm single. Most synagogues are a very strange fit for someone like me. And it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the right place for me. But I have this amazing Jewish community just all over the country and all over the world, from my meditation retreats, from so much of the stuff I've been doing with my book. And I just feel like there's been such support from that. There's been such a sense of being held and kind of being able to talk about this with people who kind of share common values and a common spiritual language. So that has just been so helpful to me. Like, this would be so difficult and isolating if I didn't feel like I was part of this broader community. So that has been hugely helpful to me. And I also just think, like, just being able to kind of study our texts, just like I have a Haruta where we go through Psalms. We're just going through the Psalms one by one with a dear friend, and that has been very moving. Some of the Psalms are, like, not my jam. It's like, God is the big, powerful military guy, and it's like but some of the Psalms are really visceral and personal and moving, and so that, to dive into that part of our tradition, has been so helpful. I think without that language and that community, I would find this very isolating and very hard. And I still do, right? Everyone feels that way, but I think it would be worse.
Peter asked to all of us of you a question a little bit ago. How do you bring Jewish values into your government service, or how did you and have you incorporated them into your work?
It's funny. My study of Judaism, it didn't actually, like, it didn't sort of give me new values that I then brought into government. What it made me do instead was to recognize how so much of the work I was doing in government was actually rooted in a very Jewish framework. I was able to kind of take what I was doing and connect it back to my core Jewish values. So I think a lot about the idea of us all being created in the image of the divine, which I don't care what you believe theologically. Isaiah Greenberg beautifully articulates it. That means that we are all each infinitely worthy. We are all totally equal to each other, and we are each unique. There's no one else like us. And I think understanding that idea, I realized that basically every speech I was writing for Michelle Obama was making that point. It just was. If she was writing a speech about how girls in developing nations around the world should have a chance to go to school, what she was saying was every single one of these girls is infinitely worthy and precious. These girls are equal to every child on this planet, including my daughters. And each of these girls is unique. They each have this unique world of possibility to offer to us. And so I think just understanding that I was articulating such a core Jewish value, it made my work feel more urgent and also just more personal. So that's kind of how I connected the two.
I'm not going to ask Carolyn's question, but I'm enjoying reading it in the chat window. Sarah, we've got like 2 or 3 more minutes, and I wonder if there's anything else you wanted to share with us, share with this group as a last final few thoughts before we have to say thank you and goodbye.
It's funny, like I sort of saw in the chat a lot of questions about the Obamas and my relationship with them and like, what did they think? And that's something I get a lot. So I can just, it's funny. I think a lot of times people expect that when you're a speechwriter for someone in the White House, you kind of like just spend a lot of time chit-chatting with them or hanging out. And while I feel very close to Mrs. Obama in professional ways, the White House is so crazy that anytime I would get time with her, I was just trying to get what I needed for a speech. So I actually I think she knew I was exploring Judaism and was excited about that. But, I didn't really talk to her about my Jewish journey until the very end when, she kind of requested, we had a one-on-one meeting about what I was doing next. And I didn't want to tell her that I wanted to write this book on Judaism because it just was so random and weird, and I didn't have a book deal or an agent or anything. So she said, like, what are you doing next? And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'll freelance, or I'm not just some writing or something. And she was like, Sarah, I'm a little worried about you. Like, you seem a little lost now. Are you okay? What's going on? And I was like, all right, fine. I have this idea. I want to write a book about Judaism. She was like, oh, great. You should do that. You should totally do that. That sounds amazing. Like, why don't you just say that? She always really encouraged us to do what we were passionate about, especially after leaving the White House. And so that was pretty special. And when my book came out, both she tweeted about it. The president recently tweeted about it. They've been really, really supportive. And I miss them, and I miss my colleagues from that time. It was a really loving and very supportive White House to work in. I'm sure.
What's your next project? What's next up for Sarah?
Yeah, I would like to write another book, and I'd like it to be about God, the divine, Jewish spirituality. I just think there's so much to say there. And I think looking at a lot of the books available now, they're really, a lot of them are very difficult and very academic and just and kind of esoteric. Like, they're hard to kind of get into. So I'd like to write something that's maybe more accessible, maybe a little more personal, but also really substantive. So that's what I'm sure. We'll see. It's an uncertain time, so who knows? But that's what I'd like to focus on next.
Amazing. Well, we look forward to following whatever comes next for you, and want to just, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. Thank you for joining us today at eFestival. It's really such a gift to be able to learn with and from you. And you, unlike all of our presenters we asked to present for 50 minutes, you have presented for 57 because you did 7 minutes during the opening celebration as well. So thank you for giving even a little extra of your time. Everyone, let's all thank Sarah. You at this point probably understand how to use the technology. You're going to log out of this Zoom room, or in a second you'll just be kicked out. Sorry, nothing offensive here. Then you're invited to log into your next sessions, which will start in about 10 minutes. You got a little time to stretch your legs.
Wait, actually,
and Sarah's
sorry.
got one last thing, please.
I'm seeing a bunch of questions. Sorry, I'm seeing a bunch of questions about my book in the chat, and I should have told you its title. That's not helpful. The title is here all along. You can get it at your local bookstore if you can. You can get it on Amazon. It is available in hardcover, in Kindle, and in audiobook. So many different ways to get it. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier.
There's even a button within the schedule online that says buy this book, and that will help you to buy Sarah's book, because we think it's excellent, and we want everyone to read it. And you can do the same for any of our presenters today who are published authors. We're not partial to anyone, but this is Sarah's session, so we'll promote her book. Sarah, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. Enjoy your next sessions, and enjoy the rest of your day here with us learning. Take care. Learn on. Bye.
Bye.